Good evening, everyone. Warm welcome to the Institute of Physics. Welcome to our new building. It's still quite new for us. We're still getting used to it. We moved in on the 29th of October. We were a bit unkind to ourselves. We had our first event on the 31st of October. But it's great to have you here in the space. We've tried our best with the new building to be an articulation of what we're about as an organization. So it has several living research projects. If you've wandered around, you'll see it's very physicsy. We've got 12 projects that connect the building, universities and schools, all active research projects. There's one important thing I need to tell you about the building because it has some very good, efficient evacuation routes. And you'll be really pleased to know we haven't organized a drill for our fire alarm. So if you hear an evacuation alarm, the exit routes are through either door, and then on either side there is a staircase that you go up and doors on either side that take you out onto the street, onto Caledonian Road. If you turn right and go this way, down to the corner, then the point to gather is on the corner. We have a new building. We almost have a new strategy. In 2019, we'll be publishing our new strategy. It's great to see in the room tonight so many collaborators, partners, friends and colleagues who we've worked with continually over the years, and we're really looking forward to having those conversations with you in due course about what our new plans are for the next 5 years and how we can work together with you to deliver those. But that's not for tonight, that's for another occasion. So to kick us off for tonight, I'm really pleased to hand over to Dr. Sarah Main, the Director of CaSE. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here in the Institute of Physics new building. I think it's a building that just embodies what I think the Institute's sort of vision is, but also I think Paul Hardacre, the Chief Executive's excitement about it as well. I think I feel it in the room. So thank you very much to the Institute of Physics for hosting us for our annual lecture here this evening. Thank you also to our partner, Elsevier, who are sponsoring tonight's annual lecture. For those of you that like to tweet, the hashtag is CaseLecture18, which is down here, but it's hidden away, so it's just CaseLecture18. And just so you all know, the event is being live streamed, and it'll be available to watch afterwards on YouTube. And thank you to the Institute of Physics for that as well. Just before I go on, I wanted to say a particular thank you to the whole team at CaSE for making tonight happen. And it really does take a year in the planning, and I'm really grateful for them for everything they've done to make tonight work so well. So if you don't know about us, the Campaign for Science and Engineering is the UK's leading independent advocacy group for science and engineering. And our mission is to ensure that the UK has the skills, funding and policies to enable science and engineering to thrive. And we have a growing membership of organisations and individuals that support us in that mission, and it's lovely to see so many of you here tonight. Currently 115 scientific organisations, which include businesses, universities, professional institutes, research charities, and many individuals. So this year has been a year when I think issues on the national agenda have become issues for science and engineering. Things such as skills and migration, the role of research and innovation in driving productivity and prosperity across the whole country. And I think CaSE has been able to make a big impact in a number of these areas this year, particularly on migration and on the industrial strategy's goal to increase UK's research intensity by about 1.5 times to 2.4% of GDP. But what strikes me about our work over this year is that, and about our purpose of who we are as an organisation, is that we can be a voice for the really rich ecosystem of science and engineering in the UK, and to speak up for the sector in all its settings and in all its places that it exists across all of the UK. And I think we're ever progressing towards being that fully UK-wide representative body. But the work that we do in trying to establish this positive environment for science and engineering means that ultimately we could be helping to give the best opportunity to every scientist and engineer and every organisation that makes use of their talents, and that's really important. And more than ever, that means engaging in national level debate and policy making. There's no issue on CaSE's agenda that is a science specialism. They're all actually national level discussions, and we're really keen to work together with you and with our members to cut through into debate and thinking at this level. So please do get in touch with us if you have ideas or you'd like to work together or support us in any way. So the topic of this year's CaSE annual lecture is an example of one of those issues. It's an area of national interest. Science and engineering can and will and has shaped it, but equally it will be shaped by decisions that are made by government on behalf of us all. When we first thought about this topic at CaSE, I really wanted to create a discussion about the role of government in the future success of AI, through funding, yes, but also through the other functions of politics and government, through political rhetoric, support, through encouraging public dialogue, regulation, international cooperation, and so on. And I particularly wanted not just to cover the technicalities of what AI is, but also to explore its impact on society. And I'm really delighted that we've gathered together three people who I think can really draw out the rich seams of those topics in the discussion tonight, and it's my pleasure to introduce them to you now. So firstly, Professor Jim Al-Khalili. Jim is a theoretical physicist, an author and broadcaster, and he's a professor of physics at the University of Surrey, where he also holds a chair in public engagement of science. He's a fellow and trustee of the Institute of Physics here, as well as being a trustee of CaSE. And he's also a fellow of the Royal Society and the current president of the British Science Association. The opportunities and challenges of AI have featured in Jim's work over the past year, including a BBC4 TV programme, The Joy of AI, which came out in the autumn to critical acclaim, and his presidential address as the new incoming president of the BSA was on the AI revolution. Dame Wendy Hall, who's joining us this evening, is Regis Professor of Computer Science at the University of Southampton and is the Executive Director of the Web Science Institute. As one of the first computer scientists to undertake research in multimedia and hypermedia, she has been at the forefront of thinking about the web and this kind of multimedia, hypermedia environment ever since. She has been a member of the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology and a founder member of the Scientific Council of the European Research Council and the president of the British Computer Society. She's a fellow of the Royal Society and, I'm sure among her many plaudits, is also a member of the Advisory Council of CaSE. She's a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on the Digital Economy. And importantly for tonight's discussion, she was the co-chair of the UK government's AI review, leading to the AI sector deal in the industrial strategy. Professor Alan Winfield, who's joining us this evening, is Professor of Robot Ethics at the University of the West of England and a visiting professor at the University of York. He co-founded Bristol Robotics Laboratory in 1992, where his research is focused on cognitive robotics. He's an advocate for robot ethics and was co-organizer and member of a working group that drafted the principles of robotics. And he's a member of the British Standards Institute working group on robot ethics. So I'm sure you'll agree that the sort of experiences and insight that all these three different people have will, I think, lead to a really rich discussion this evening on making artificial intelligence a reality and the role of government in the future success of AI. So please will you join me in welcoming these three wonderful speakers to the stage.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, well, introductions have been made. It's a real pleasure for me. I've been involved with the Institute of Physics for many, many years, and it's great now to. This is only my second visit to this new building. I was here for a meeting last week, but the first time in this lovely lecture theatre. And also, as Sarah mentioned, I've been involved with CaSE for a few years as a trustee, so it's a real honor to be asked to be involved in this year's CaSE lecture. Luckily for me, I have alongside me on stage two people who know what they're talking about. And so I will defer to them. So I'm the person with the piece of paper to sort of try and steer the discussion, but I think when we get to some of the more technical issues, I'll ask Wendy and Alan to to expand on some of those topics. So we want to cover various issues to do with AI and the connection with government, and whether we're heading in the right direction, we're doing enough, whether there's enough involvement with wider society on AI. And so what is it? We have about, I'd say about 40 minutes or so of discussion amongst ourselves. Then we'll open it up to you, to the audience, for some Q&A, and we have roving mics. Sarah mentioned, I've been sort of, I seem to have put my finger on the pulse. This is the zeitgeist this year. It seems everyone is suddenly now talking about AI. It's remarkable. I was asked to present this documentary for BBC4, The Joy of AI, which followed on. Let me explain why the name came about, because not everyone may see AI as entirely joyful. The production company that makes it also made a whole series of other documentaries, beginning with The Joy of Stats, which was presented by the late Hans Rosling. Did I?
No, you said it right.
I said it right.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Very slow, but anyway, we're not referring to any 1970s books. Stats. Hans Rosling, and that documentary won a BAFTA. Followed with The Joy of Data, I think that Hannah Fry presented. So The Joy of AI, when they said we want to call it Joy of AI, I said, are we sure we want that name? And they said yes, because it fits into the thing. So we had to be very careful on the program. But the program was very sort of a triumphalist look at how wonderful and the great opportunities that AI is going to present to us. And I do firmly believe that, and I get your views on this shortly, but I mean, we've only had the internet and the World Wide Web for 25 years.
30.
And 30? Well, I knew about it in the early 90s. So some people may have been in on it slightly a bit earlier than me.
Tim will count the birthday from March 9 next year.
There was some debate on social media as to when the birthday will be.
He will count it from March next year.
Okay, 30 years, right. We've had the internet, the World Wide Web for nearly 30 years, ladies and gentlemen. I think AI will, think of how much the internet and the World Wide Web have transformed our lives. I'm trying to imagine a world without it. It's not that long ago. AI will transform our lives and our world probably more so. And it won't take 30 years for that to happen. So we might see that as very exciting. We might be somewhat afraid. So I say I've been involved with various events discussing AI, particularly with Wendy. We were up in Manchester a few months ago for the Royal Society's U&AI series. I've discussed a lot of the stuff to do with artificial intelligence and robotics and the web with both of you, because both panelists here have been past guests on my radio show on the Life Scientific. So I know of their work very well. So we want to cover several areas, and I think probably the best place to start is to get a general definition of what artificial intelligence is. My documentary on BBC4 made it, so my daughter tells me, onto Gogglebox. So there's a general stunned silence here from the audience of the CaSE lecture have no idea what Gogglebox is. So this is a TV program in which people sit on the sofa watching TV programs. That's basically it. And so there was, and all these people on TV apparently are watching The Joy of AI, and none of them knew what AI stood for. They all thought it meant artificial insemination. So that's scary if that's the level of understanding of AI of wider society. So Wendy, maybe I can ask you to give us a broad definition of what society thinks AI means, what you see AI as meaning, and how did it come about? How long have we had it?
Okay, I would like to say my claim to fame is my husband were invited to be on Gogglebox. I mean, to be
on the sofa.
Yeah, but we declined, and I'm so glad we did. But anyway, that's another whole story, another universe. We were on Gogglebox, right? So, well, artificial intelligence has. Interesting, you say it's going to impact our lives within the next 30 years. I'm not sure I agree with you on that. But it's been in existence as a term since the 50s. And actually, we can claim it from the early 50s from Turing. I think the UK likes to claim the invention of AI, and Turing didn't call it AI, but he did talk about intelligence. He basically asked, I can't remember exactly the title of the paper, but it was Can Machines Think? It's often paraphrased as it's do you know the title of the paper? Something like Can Machines
Someone here
be,
probably knows.
Look it up on, it's Can Machines...
the first sentence, in fact,
is
says, you know, this paper sets out to answer the question, can a machine think?
Yeah, so that's how the title's slightly different to that. And that's where the whole idea of the Turing test stems from. And then the idea was picked up in America and given, the phrase was coined, artificial intelligence, to mean, can we build, actually they were thinking software, I suppose, in those days, that can have the intelligence of a human being. I'm not going to try and define intelligence for a human being, but it was can a machine think as well as a human being, and they coined the phrase artificial intelligence. And AI, the thing about AI that's different to the way the internet and the web on top of the internet has taken off in the last 30 years, in that AI goes forward, it has great leaps forward, and then generally is followed by an AI winter. And when they started with AI, the computers were primitive. I had hardly any memory, hardly any processing power. So it was all about decision trees, basically. And I actually I wasn't that old. I didn't start AI in the 60s. I was at school then. But I did cut my teeth on AI in my early days as a computer scientist, thinking about intelligent tutoring systems. And in the 80s, when I was moving from pure maths to computer science, the idea of an intelligent tutoring system on a Commodore PET or a BBC Micro or the sorts of machines or even the big mainframes that were around was just preposterous. But the concept, thinking about how you would build one, what that would mean, how you would mimic how human beings learn, was very exciting to researchers and always has been. So there's always been a drive from research. Then we had the development of expert systems and rule-based systems, and an AI winter. And AI winters are really when the funding stops for researchers. But the researchers carry on somehow. We lost a lot of good researchers in the AI winter that followed the expert systems. In fact, my predecessor, James Lighthill, is definitely Professor Lighthill, famously published a report in 1973 for the government that said there would be no more funding for AI research from the UK. Zilch. Right, that was the second, or one of the AI winters. We lost a lot of AI researchers from the UK, including Geoffrey Hinton, who went to America and then Canada and invented neural nets. Right? And it's neural nets, that was the next wave of AI in the 80s, which was trying to mimic the way our brain works. They were trying to mimic that, simulate it in some way. That's led to the whole development of machine learning and deep learning. But they, I can't remember when the Japanese fifth generation project was. That was around this sort of time, and they were going to take over the world with the money they were piling into AI. But the research, there was another AI, so they invented neural networks. There's another AI winter. No more. But at all this time, the previous generations of AI are feeding into industry. So if you look around you, what we might call good old-fashioned AI is around us everywhere. Expert systems, simple neural nets. I mean, well, unfortunately, Mike Lynch was in the news again recently with autonomy. Autonomy was based on neural nets, right? A lot of people don't know that. It was a black box neural net system. And, you know, so when we say there's an AI winter, it means there's not much funding for research. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But then you had what was referred to earlier, when we went in with what the current wave of AI is really machine learning, which has stemmed from that neural network type research. And this is what's led to things like AlphaGo, the DeepMind system that beat the Go champion. We've had IBM Watson, which wasn't really some machine learning, some other stuff, which beat the Jeopardy champion, and Deep Blue before that beat the chess champion. So we have great success in very narrow AI. And what I will finish and hand over to Alan in a minute, but I just want to say something about why the hype now. Firstly, it's the sophistication of machine learning. When I started out as a computer scientist doing AI and intelligent tutoring systems, people were trying to do speech processing, image processing, video processing, and it was incredibly difficult and really, really hard to just understand any speech, pick up anything in a picture. And it's the machine learning and the development of the deep learning that has enabled the revolution in the fact that now we've got the Siris, the Alexas, we could do face recognition, and that was considered to be an almost impossible problem. The Chinese had cracked it, and we might come back to that later. And these things now, it's this revolution based on the fact we've got lots of data and very fast computers has given rise to this hype wave now. I also think that there was all the world leaders went to Davos in January 2017 and got a copy of Schwaber's, this is the World Economic Forum organizers' book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And they all came back from Davos and thought, we're going to lose all these jobs, what are we going to do about it? And I got the phone call in end of February 2017 to say, would we do the AI review? That's when the leaders of our countries started to think they needed to worry about this. And I'm sure that book had a lot to do with it. And so where we are now, we're in an AI hype on machine learning. I think this one has legs in that I think industry, because we have the compute power and the data, we will get stuff that will affect our lives. But I still think there'll be another AI winter because it will not deliver on all the hype. We're nowhere near general AI, which is what we now, I don't like the term, but it's what tends to be used when you're talking about machines that could be intelligent as human beings, whatever that means. And so we aren't anywhere near. This leap forward will take us so far. We'll then be embedded in industry, but we have to keep research going. And I think it's one of the most important things to do, is keep the research going when we're beyond the hype cycle.
Alan, do you agree that there hasn't actually been a paradigm shift or advance in AI? We've had so much more data, machines getting more powerful, but serendipity, as Wendy says, of governments realizing this could be the fourth industrial revolution. Do you agree that
I do, yes.
It's just luck that somehow 2018 everyone seems to be talking about it?
Well, yes, it's not just luck. I mean, we've, as Wendy hinted at, there's been an enormous amount of investment, private investment, and there's been a big shift in the sense that some of the best AI research is now going on in the private sector. In fact, we have one of the best AI companies in the world right here in London, DeepMind.
A few hundred yards from
That's right. And of course, arguably, when you've got an infinite budget, which they more or less have, then you hire amazing people, which they do. Then you're going to get some very good research going on. But I think you're right that nothing fundamentally new has been invented for a long time.
But DeepMind would argue that, we heard it in today, that one of their algorithms has just won some competition to sort of model protein folding, which is one of the big, unsolved, most difficult problems in science.
Absolutely, and essentially what they're doing is exploiting an as yet unexploited technology. I'm not saying that there isn't some amazing innovation, there is, but in a sense, it's not new science.
Okay. So how do you feel, Alan, about people who are concerned that it's happening too quickly? And you hear that a lot. I know there's the hype in the media and the obsession with Hollywood, and then as soon as anyone, you must get it all the time, both of you, I guess. As soon as anyone's talking AI, and you've got the Terminator, it's Skynet, which of nonsense, of course, and if it's going to happen, it's decades or a century away. But there are people who are saying, AIs, deep minds, algorithms, already starting to show some rudimentary intuition, or creativity, and the programmers themselves are saying, we don't know. The famous AlphaGo example when it made that move against the Korean champion. We don't even know how it did it.
That's right. Yeah.
Are people right to be worried about the rate of development of the technology?
Yes and no. I mean, let me start with the no.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
academic.
sorry. Well, I am.
I would say the same.
There's no need to worry about as it were, the intelligence that's emerging. So, superintelligence we often read a lot about, and several famous people, some billionaires, some scientists who really should have known better, have said that we should be seriously worried about superintelligence. We should not. I mean, superintelligence is, well, I would say it's not theoretically impossible. What am I talking about? What I'm talking about is an AI that is not just as smart as a human, although that in itself begs the question, which human exactly you're talking about. All of them, or, and I think it's theoretically not impossible, but so difficult that, the analogy that I like to give is that I think the gap between where we are right now, which is narrow AI, as Wendy rightly described, and superintelligence, is about the same as the gap between current spacecraft engine technology and the warp drive. That's how big the gap it is.
Yeah, but the warp drive is possible.
That's what I mean. That's why I choose that.
Probably.
Oh, I was going to say the opposite, but there you go.
Well,
I'm worried about relativity theory.
I'm choosing something which some
Yes.
physicists think may just be a little bit possible, and I think that's what superintelligence is. I think that's so it's not something we should be worrying about. But I said yes as well as no, and here I disagree with Wendy. I think we have AI right now. I think it's already in the world. You're using it all the time when you do a Google search, when you buy something online, and especially when you get those really annoying adverts that tell you what to buy next. That's an AI.
Or when Netflix or YouTube tell you what you want to watch.
I mean, I think exactly one of the most wonderful examples of AI that we use is machine translation. It's extraordinarily good, and it's got a lot better suddenly because of the whole big data machine learning thing. And we do need to worry about the AI that we have right now. So, well, one example is that we've already seen the political weaponization of AI. There's no doubt, there's loads of evidence that AI was used to influence people in both the presidential election 2016 and in the Brexit referendum. And we should be worried about that. I mean, that's just one example of the misuse of AI. But I worry about lots of other things. I mean, we're starting to see AIs being used in government departments for things like policing, so-called predictive policing. There are proposals, I'm not sure if they've yet come into practice, that I worry about a lot, about AI being used, for instance, to recommend loans, to recommend immigration status or welfare payments. Those kinds of applications we need to worry about. And of course, I need to mention robots because I'm a roboticist. So for me, a robot is basically an AI in a physical body. It's an embodied AI. And I think for me, it's the purest form of AI because I'm what we call an embodimentalist. I happen to believe that you can't have real intelligence without being a thing in the world, which is what we are. We don't know any natural examples. There are zero natural examples of disembodied AI, or intelligence, should I say, not AI. And we have, of course, driverless cars already. Many of you, I'm sure, will know people with relatively well-off people with top-of-the-range Teslas. That means that whenever they engage the autopilot, and it's happening in this country, then that's an AI driving that car. Now,
Sorry, but I think that goes a bit too far. Is it really? Is there in terms of behind the autopilot of the Tesla?
sure, yeah.
Because it's rule based.
No,
but
it's.
There's no land. Sorry for it.
I'm pretty sure that those guys are using machine learning.
AI, but they are using machine learning.
But the point
Okay.
I was going to make,
We won't start a discussion until, but hang on to that.
yeah.
We'll come back
I mean,
to it if
They
you
are
like.
point-
using machine learning.
actually, whether or not it's machine learning or not, I believe it is.
Yeah, because they're doing
Yeah.
it for the image recognition.
Exactly. The point that worries me a lot, and I've said this in fact in Parliament today, that autopilot has not been certified as safe. Actually, that's in a sense not surprising because the standards don't even exist yet. So we have a technology that's in the wild, if you like, that for which we have no standards against which to test the safety of that. And I think that's deeply worrying.
On this issue of standards and ethics, Wendy, I mean, imagine, I mean, not maybe just with driverless cars, but with the fact that there is so much data and information about us that people are concerned about. You know, I know we have GDPR and that's going some small step, but you know, we have all these different organizations, the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation that's just been set up, and there's various other bodies. We are, as a society, maybe not the wider public, but certainly governments and academics and industrialists are thinking about some of these ethical problems. Are we going in the right direction? Are we doing enough?
Well, first of all, I want to say there is AI everywhere. I didn't want to imply there wasn't. It's just, you know, we have got AI everywhere, and we haven't focused on ethics much before now. I think actually we absolutely need to think about ethics. Just in terms of, I mean, in the future, as AI gets more sophisticated, potentially more intelligent, things can be built, we might have to worry about much bigger ethical issues than we can even contemplate now. At the moment, the focus is really on data ethics.
Yeah.
And I think the absolute major challenge for our time is who is allowed to do what with whose data. And that's what the ethics discussion is really about at the moment. And that has got to be, there's got to be a lot of discussion, and it's the bit where we could lose people's trust or gain people's trust if we get it wrong or right. I don't know which way around I had that, but anyway. We cannot do that just as the UK or as Europe or as part of an alliance with the US. We have to do that as a world, I think, because we, you know, at the moment we have an open internet, we trade digitally with no barriers. And so we have got to think about that from, you know, some sort of global perspective. And our government, assuming we have one, I didn't say that, our government has got to represent us at the top tables. And so we have to have that debate in the country. But I do think at the moment there's too much ethics. It's become a very crowded space. You listed some of the... We have the Center for Data Ethics and Innovation, which is the advisory ethical... It's meant to advise government, and I think it will mostly focus on regulation, you know, advising government on what laws have got to be made and how you regulate this space. Do we develop AI audits for companies, that sort of thing? They will take information from all over. So all these bodies that are setting up as ethics councils and developing ethics frameworks, there are tons of them out there now, not just here, all over the place. How are they all going to, you know, come together? There's lots of different conversations going on, but they're actually all talking about the same thing at the moment, which is ethical principles. But nothing goes further than we must have ethical principles. And you can have a list. I mean, there's the Bishop of Oxford's 10 Commandments, AI commandments, that came in the Select Committee report, which are great. I mean, they're a good set of principles. And I'm on the board of the Digital Catapult, the Machine Intelligence Garage, who provide cloud computing for AI startups. They've got a set of ethical principles which are fabulous. And they're all sorts of, but they're all sort of the same thing.
All sort of the same.
And we've got to get down to some detail, things like, you know, it's very difficult. A lot of this stuff is black box-like, or at least it's very difficult to reverse engineer how a decision's being made. You touched on this. With the deep learning. It's really hard to be an explanation of what's happened. And we've got to have some sort of understanding of accountability of algorithms. Can we do transparency of algorithms? What does that mean? And you know, are you asking companies to expose everything they do to the world? You can't do that. So what can we regulate? What do we keep unregulated to enable everything to flourish, as the Royal Society report says? You know, these are, and we've got to work. I think we have to work through examples of it.
Yeah, I think we do.
I mean, I take your point about the world having all to succumb collectively to some of these decisions about ethics or regulation.
Well, there are no decisions yet.
No, I know. But we're a long way from doing that. But if we have to, we know we can't come to agreement on how to tackle climate change. We know we're worried about how to come to agreement on ethics of genetic engineering. When in the West we are concerned there's a moratorium on certain types of research, but in other countries they're sort of ploughing ahead, as we heard in the news this week. And the UK is one of the countries that leads the world currently in AI. And as I say, it's one of the forms one of the points of the government's 4 points of industrial strategy. And we don't want to lose that edge, because there are wonderful opportunities, for industry and business with AI. So the UK, I guess, can't afford to slow down or lose its edge if other countries are ploughing ahead. Does that affect what regulations may end up being put in place, or what ethical constraints are put in place?
You want to go first?
Okay. I mean, there's no doubt that government is involved, and government's been involved quite a lot. I think since 2016 was the first common select committee on robotics and AI, and then 2017, of course, the Lords Select Committee, and now there's a whole bunch of all-party parliamentary groups on both AI, data, and so on. So the government is, clearly very mindful of what's going on, and I think, I'll give credit. I mean, I don't often give credit to government, but I'll give credit to that those committees that I've been involved in are thoughtful and are really trying to navigate, I think, genuinely trying to find the balance, if you like, between regulation where it's needed and important, and what you might call soft governance, which is regulation, if you like, without making laws. It's regulation through standards more often, and no regulation. So I think, and certainly, like Wendy, involved with globally both the WEF and the IEEE, which is the US-based Institution of Electronic Engineers. I think we're not just leading in AI, but I think we're also seen as a beacon of thinking in ethics, in this ethics space, which, as you say rightly, is very crowded.
And I think actually, so yes, we do have a fabulous legacy in AI to protect. We have fabulous universities that have been doing AI since it started.
Since the beginning, yeah.
Since the beginning. We have wonderful researchers. We are losing them, and we need to retain and recruit aggressively. But they are, we do have, we have wonderful universities like Oxford and Cambridge who people will come to given the right offer. We have fabulous robotics research legacy to protect. I mean, the Japanese are doing a huge amount, but You know, we can match them in terms of what we do in manufacturing. We also have a really good tech startup culture in the UK, which successive governments have developed. So in the league tables, if you exclude China, because it's hard to know exactly what where they are on this, we are second only to the US, both in terms of research in AI and in terms of tech startups. We have almost twice as many tech startups in the UK than the rest of Europe put together. And so we're second in the league to the US, and that's what I think the government is looking to protect and grow. And I think if we can lead on the regulatory environment as well, and we have fabulous, you know, when I travel around the world, everyone copies us in terms of, you know, we have fabulous information commissioners. We have a fabulous information commissioner and the fabulous information commissioner's office already set up. We had data protection laws even, you know, long before GDPR. You know, that's taken it further, but I think if you create the right regulatory environment, companies will come here. I mean, that's how it worked with the banks. So I think we can do the same with AI, yeah.
Another responsibility of government that I want to touch on is that, as well as supporting business and promoting the technology, the government is also responsible for the stewardship of public awareness of what AI is capable of. And one of the things that concerns a lot of AI researchers is that there could be a public backlash against AI if people fear what it is capable of. And of course, that then just leads to a widening gap between the haves and have-nots. If people are concerned about, you know, how it's going to affect jobs. What is government's role, or what would you advise government to be doing, provided it's not being distracted by other things, in terms of this stewardship of public awareness?
Well, I think certainly government should be promoting really quite, excuse me, large conversations. So, you know, let's take driverless cars. It's a really good case study because driverless cars, a bit like, you know, the original manually driven cars 100 years ago, profoundly changed cities. And in a sense, it was, you know, the experience, the history, if you like, of cities 100 years ago is that it wasn't a change in favor of humans. I mean, basically, jaywalking wasn't a thing before the automobile, and cities, the whole of the streets were colonized by people. People lived and worked on the pavements. You know, the street in between the pavements was also full of people and horses and stuff like that. And that all changed with the automobile. Now, one of the things we need to worry about with driverless cars is, in a sense, we end up re-engineering cities and urban spaces to suit the technology, to fit the, if you like, the constraints, the requirements of the technology. That's the wrong thing to do. Yeah. It's the wrong thing to do. And to go back to the public engagement thing, we need to have a big public engagement, you know, if you like, conversation, genuine public conversation, so that we can decide what kind of driverless cars we want in our lives, in our cities, on our streets, and perhaps importantly, equally importantly, what we do not want to have. Deciding what not to have in your life, I think, is just as important.
I also think that we always think in terms of how things are today. So when we think of driverless cars, we think of them filling the streets, like, you know, full of cars, like the traffic out here. Yeah. It won't be like that because there's lots of other hugely exciting developments in transport. Yeah. And I go to China a lot, and what they're doing with their train system, and they're going to bring in these mega loops, Shanghai to Beijing in 50 minutes. I'm not sure I want to be on that train. But, you know, these are amazing developments, amazing. And, you know, drones that pick, I mean, I think it will go into the skies rather than on the streets, actually. We will have, you know, the last bit to get you to your, assuming we still live in houses like we do today. You know, the last bit to get you to your house may be a pod, but actually up until that point, it could be a very well operated transport system. It seems madness to say this in the UK when we can't even build a high-speed train from London to Birmingham. But so we might lose out on this, but I think that it will not be like it is today. So the technology, the fact we're developing the technology is fabulous. We need to think about the ethics. But to be honest with you, I think it will become, if we get it right, it'll become a people-centered transport system. It will be different if we get it right.
Yes, if we get it right. But in a sense, and this is again coming back to where government can intervene. Manufacturers don't necessarily want that. I mean,
No, and not, I mean, a lot of men say to me, I still want to be able to drive cars.
Sure.
And I want to be able to kill people as well in them, you know. I mean, they don't say that, but, you know, I mean, sorry.
But I always find that very strange that we hold driverless cars to a different ethical standard. You know, if Google's car kills one person, we throw our hands up in shock and horror. But
we
hundreds
all
of people get killed by people, and that's sort of okay.
And I didn't do an ethics test in my driving test. I don't know if anyone else did.
Right.
But the point is that you know, the manufacturers would rather wealthy people, you know, buy top of the range
at the moment,
automated cars, and so that doesn't help everybody.
But this is what pays for the development of the technology, basically.
Well, yeah.
But what about AI in more general?
Sorry, I was going to say I'd like to see driverless cars, you know, supporting, you know, elderly people.
To get them to the pub, yeah, absolutely.
Well, you know, with disabled people.
Or the hospital, yeah.
But here's the thing, that requires a different paradigm. So most driverless cars right now are still, you still have to have a competent driver in charge of the vehicle, effectively acting as the pilot does, you know, in an aircraft while, you know, while the autopilot's engaged, which is completely mad, of course. It's the wrong paradigm.
What?
So what we need is driverless cars that don't have a steering wheel at all.
Exactly.
And you know. Yeah,
so why do you think the
basically.
boot of a car is called a boot? It's because where the footman stood in his boots at the back of a car when they were transitioning from stagecoaches to cars, right? I mean, we're in that transition now. It will be very different to what people think it will be, right? So. And people will not own cars, and that's the hard thing for some people to accept. They want these high-end cars. As I say, I think that pays for the fact that there are rich people that can buy them is paying for the development of the technology. It will not be like that in 20, 30 years' time, I don't think.
I hope you're right.
Well, I mean, we're focusing on driverless cars, but more broadly, as a case study, but more broadly, AI coming into and automation more generally is going to have a huge effect on jobs. Although ever since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, technology has replaced humans. I mean, that's obvious.
But it grows more jobs.
And
more jobs have grown as a consequence.
That's what's happened in
over
the past.
time.
But the argument is, in this case, because we cannot imagine entirely how much AI is going to change our world, we cannot predict how many jobs are going to. Yes, we'll create new jobs in the care system, in education. There'll always be jobs which require human interaction. But a lot of people are quite rightly thinking, well, my job, I suspect, an AI can do it at some point in the future.
Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very easy. But I mean, it's going to need a change in how we educate and how we train people for jobs, because you will no longer have a job for life, because every 10 years an AI is going to come along and be able to do what you could do.
I mean, I would say that I absolutely agree we need change, but you know, I think we're kind of asking the wrong question. If we're asking how can we make sure everybody has a job, well, in fact, I'm going to remind you that actually Aristotle, interestingly, 300 BC, wrote that if tools could work of their own accord, then masters would have no need of apprentices and lords no need of slaves. So Aristotle kind of anticipated the issue of jobs, if you like, And here's another little bit of history. Maynard Keynes, some of you will know, wrote in the 1930s, and Harold Wilson in the 1960s in his famous White Heat of Technology speech. Both Maynard Keynes and Harold Wilson optimistically looked forward to us working less. I think either 3 or 4 day weeks by the year 2000. Now, the thing is that those were not kind of doom-laden, fearful predictions. They were optimistic predictions.
So,
they really believed and wanted automation to allow us to work less. Now, something's gone terribly wrong, because we now find ourselves in a hyper-work society rather than working less. And so for me, the real question is not how do we replace jobs, it's how do we make sure the wealth created by robotics, AI, and automation is shared by all so that we can all, in fact, work less. That's the point of automation, the absolute point of automation.
and that we do jobs that are more fulfilling
Yeah.
and not repetitive.
Yeah.
I do think, though, I mean, I was at a fabulous seminar in Brussels this week about business history, and there were some wonderful economists talking. I learned a lot from them. And looking back at the Industrial Revolution, and, this is all what we're doing today is the part of the technological revolution. And you could argue that the sort of first wave of it did not bring us the leisure we thought. In fact, it created a whole new industry. The leisure industry did not exist before computers, right? This whole industry that I pay a personal trainer and I drive to his gym, right? It's like, well, where did that come from? This whole issue of, we have gyms that we drive to get the exercise instead of... that industry didn't exist before computers because we pack it all in. But I think that might unpack a bit with AI. And he made the point that with the Industrial Revolution came the 5-day week eventually. And that actually came about, I think, I'm not an economic historian, but we used to send kids up the chimneys and everybody worked 7 days a week, very hard labour conditions. And but the automation reduced the amount of work that needed to be done by humans. And it was the growth of the unions that actually brought about the better working conditions. And we probably I talk about a change in social contract, which could lead us to a 4-day week. In a positive sense, but we need to reinvent unions as well. And nothing against, I've been a member of my union since I've been a lecturer, right? So I'm a unionist in that sense, but we need to reinvent unions. And I think you mentioned about care work. The Japanese have brought in robots to care for their elderly, but there's a lot of things that at the moment robots can't do, that you need the empathy and the things that, both the physical and the mental support that people need from other human beings that robots cannot give us at the moment. And I think we've got to really think about how we value that sort of work. As a lot of people would like to do it as part of a choice to do it. But also people who are paid to do it, we need to really value that. And we need to have we need to have some way of sorting out a new social contract.
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree.
Well, I think we should leave our discussion there and open it up to the audience. And so we have roving mics and already hands are shooting up. So I think the mics are just being distributed and turned on. So whoever gets their microphone first, there's a hand already up here at the front.
Lady definitely put her hand up first.
You won.
That's
and
usually a
then
bad
gentleman
sign.
there second. So
hard question.
yes, the front row only because the hand went up very quickly and you're very close to me and I saw you first.
Thank you. Picking up on the title, the role of government, which can be really multifarious. I was wondering, in a very distant future, maybe, how would the government be able to compete with private competition? So, say, for example, if the government wanted to introduce the use of a really highly professional use of AI in the healthcare system or in similar public industries. How would the ratio work? If you can pick up, I know we should probably ask a government representative, but you have a lot of work experience. So
Government doesn't compete in, it wants industry to come in and run those services in the hospitals. The government doesn't do that. Government facilitates industry doing stuff for us. So I don't really, I think what are you thinking?
I mean, in fact, I'm on a current review. It's called the Topol Review, which is a review of robotics and AI in the NHS, and especially looking at training, which is interesting, skills training. But yes, I mean, the model is where essentially the clinicians, the healthcare professionals decide together with patients, the patient groups, what kinds of AI we need to support the work of the NHS, and then we go and commission companies to provide that, which I think is all absolutely fine, and of course also against standards, so that particularly standards of data, data privacy, and so on, that government sets, if you like. So a very controlled kind of procurement, which I think is right. And is no different, in fact, to the way that we've procured, government procures stuff, for everything from transport to,
But isn't there the risk of creating an even bigger divide between the state and the private sector?
I don't see that.
Well, no, not if we, no, I don't. No, I don't see that. If we, I mean,
providing it remains the national.
Yeah,
health
exactly.
service.
I mean, if that's that, but that's up to democracy and governments to make sure we. But assuming we keep a national health service, then no, it's.
Okay, thank you. So we had lady there, and then we have two here. Right. Well, we'll keep the questions and the answers as brief as possible to get as much as possible.
That the point is that AI, and we keep talking about the downside. The upside is AI could save us huge amounts of money in the health service.
Absolutely.
Huge amounts.
It can save lives because it can.
And so we'll be able to do a lot more with our money if we get it right.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right.
Hi, you spoke about the majority of funding in research being in the private sector now rather than in universities, for example. Apart from sort of the immediate first order effects of it being driven to drive profits, what do you think are some of the second order or greater ramifications of the funding being private rather than public research?
I mean, you mean for AI as opposed to?
Yes, for AI research.
Genetics, for example, and there are lots of areas of technological advances which are, I guess, being driven by the private sector because there's more money involved.
Yeah. Well, if I may just to make a start on that. I mean, there's still a lot of money going into universities, so let's not be too, depressed in a way.
Alan has just received a grant to do some research on robotics. He was telling me on the way in this evening.
In fact, on explainability, which is a really important aspect of robotics and AI. But the point is that if companies, of course, invent AIs, they invent applications. If they want to use them, apply them, if you like, in society, then they will have to do so within the legal frameworks and such like that we create. And, we mentioned earlier transparency. Now, transparency, I think, is really important. And I'm leading a current standards working group, an IEEE standard, on transparency in autonomous systems. The basic principle behind that is very simple, that it should always be possible to find out why an autonomous system made a particular decision. And of course, loads of people have said to me, oh, no, you can't possibly have that because it means we can't use machine learning. And I say to them, yes, but hang on, if that machine learning system fails and the wrong medical diagnosis comes out and someone dies, is that okay? And they say, well, of course it's not okay. So in my view, you know, you've got to have that transparency, that scrutability. Now, you know, it's technically hard perhaps for machine learning systems, but I don't believe it's impossible.
Well, that's research, you see.
Yeah.
And I would like to make the point that, you know, the stuff that's being used, what the research that's being done in industry is generally stuff that they need now, right? They're scaling up, they're making things go faster, making it more accurate. And of course, there's some areas. I mean, if you go to Google and you get the opportunity to go to Google X, I mean, it's just mind-boggling, or Google Brain, what they're doing. Yeah. And that's, but generally speaking, the new innovative ideas come from the research, from the universities. And universities are all about education and training as well as doing research. So what we do in universities is train the PhD students. And what government has to do is make sure there's blue sky funding. No, we don't want any more AI winters. We want to make, because what's going to be impacting in 30 years' time, we don't know about yet. It's just being invented in the labs today. Yeah. And the things that were invented 10, 20 years ago will, you know, it takes that length of time to get research to a point where industry finds it useful, and then industry will take over, you know, the scaling up and so on of it. And I think it's so important to fund young people in universities with good professors. And those professors can have, you know, because we've got to compete on a worldwide scale, they can have, I hope we'll go, professors can have be a chair at university and get that top-up money from, we've got to move into the world the medics are in at the moment. Medics always earn 2 salaries at universities. And I mean, this, you know, you basically, if you have a PhD in AI from Stanford, you're talking about 6 or 7 figure starting salary, right? We can't compete with that in terms of keeping our talent here, but we could if we allow this, which they're doing much more in Canada. Canadians have got this quite well sorted in a way, ahead of us in that. So we have this professors who work both in university and in industry, go backwards and forwards.
And there are plenty of those in the UK. I know several who are working both at Amazon and Google, as well as their home universities. So
yeah, but we've got to get over this, and I'm not asking this for me, because I'm way past this, but we've got to get over this preciousness of we can't pay them more than, you know, so-and-so, because
we had 2 gentlemen here with their hands up from the beginning, so we better go to and then pass it behind you when you finish. Thank you.
Hi. One of the reasons I love working in AI is because down the pub it's a great way to start arguments, because when they find out I work in AI, they tend to point at things and say, is that AI in there? And then you can go, well, tell me what artificial intelligence is. And you can kick off that argument. And so from a government perspective, if we were to go over that argument, the following argument is, well, how do we make this AI moral? Then the easy argument question from that is, well, tell me what morality is and define that for me. Because that's a very fluid, lucid, sticky, well, it's not a sticky thing. It's based on so many things. So how does the government get over trying to legislate for something it can't really pin down?
Well, so you just happen to have...
But we do that all the time.
Yeah, we do. You just happen to have touched upon a little bit of my research. So I've been working for 5 or more years on the question of, can you make a robot that can make explicit ethical decisions? In other words, reason about ethics. It's a scientific question, not really a practical question. And the answer is yes. But you'd be interested that I've also come to the conclusion that it's a very bad idea. So, you know, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And I think that's especially true for machine ethics.
I mean, presumably you meant morality and ethics in terms of the rights of the AI, or did you mean the
Well, I interpret.
No, you interpreted it probably.
Explain why it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
I think you should.
I'm all for utilising AI, but I suppose from I'll start with that one, it's a good company. But also from, you know, simple things like such as a trolley problem. How do you start, because it's
okay, so you do mean the yeah.
I do mean, I got it
yes, so the AI, if, you know, Well, you start with becoming a sentientist, and you turn vegan, and then you don't tread on ants, and you work your way until you get to the point when AI is at that level of of you having to feel sorry for it.
So I think there are a couple of reasons that Wendy wanted me to say why I think it's a bad idea. One, I think, again, it comes back to national conversations. You know, we already delegate task-level responsibility to our machines. That's normal. But, you know, if we're going to start delegating moral responsibility, I think we're crossing a line that you know, we all need to agree is okay before we do that. That's one reason I'm not happy about machine ethics. The second is because cybersecurity. And I have a paper out called The Dark Side of Ethical Robots, where we show that it's incredibly easy to make an ethical robot into an unethical robot.
Yeah.
Becomes trivially simple. In fact, it's just the inversion of an inequality symbol. So it's not even one line of code. And we know that hacking exists. It's a serious problem. So until we can solve cybersecurity, that's another good reason for not having ethical robots.
Yes.
I just wanted to pick up on that discussion earlier on jobs, and really interesting at Wendy's point that we don't really know what new jobs are going to be created, and it could be the case where the jobs you lose are completely overwhelmed by the jobs you create. But one thing I think that is imperative to pin down is where those jobs are. And I'd kind of argue that with technology and the manufacturing industry in certain parts of the country is just, nothing has replaced the jobs that have gone there, really. So you've got wastelands in certain pockets, whether it's a failing of government or local government or the industry or whatever. So what should the government do to try to forecast what jobs might go, what might come online, and to basically make sure that jobs in local areas, are not completely decimated?
So you mean where those jobs are geographically, rather than what
Actually,
sector they're
like
in?
local populations.
Yeah,
Actually jobs.
There's been lots of analysis of job losses. I mean, I don't think the government, we didn't have to do that in our review because we just referred to all the reports from the consultancies that count the number of job losses in particular areas, and they're variously disputed or agreed. So we were asked to look at job creation, but it's really hard to know where those jobs are going to be created, which sectors they're going to be created in. You know, no one predicted the leisure industry, that sort of thing. I mean, my father was an accountant. Well, actually, he was a bookkeeper. So for most of my life, my father did pounds, shillings, and pence, long division. That, you know, he kept the company's books, a ledger system by hand with pencil and did it all by hand, mental arithmetic. And it was only towards the end of his career that calculators came in, really, the big comptometer stuff and all that. He didn't really see the computer revolution in his working lifetime. Now the finance industry is bigger than anything. You know, all those clerks' jobs have gone, but the finance industry is huge, and it does things we wouldn't even have dreamt of. I mean, you know, the types of banks we have and the way we lend and invest money and all that is completely different. It has enabled us to do things we couldn't have done before. And that will happen in the health industry, in the healthcare industry. It will happen in all our industries. It will happen in government. And it's very difficult to predict what type of jobs are going to be created and therefore where geographically they can be. I think that one of the things we can do, I'm a firm believer, we talk about we want government to adopt AI, and people tend to think big government when they think that. I think local government is absolutely where we should be targeting. I mean, big government's got to do it, but local government, we're working with Southampton City Council to look at how they can use AI, you know, apply it to the data they've got to help, I mean, with all the cuts and everything, how they can run the services more efficiently. And I think that could apply, that could really help in the sort of areas you're talking about if we could apply AI. And that might create some jobs as well around the world. But that's the best way I can answer you at the moment. So.
Thank you. Okay, so we're trying to squeeze in as many questions as we can in the last remaining minutes. So lady there in the white jacket, yeah.
Hi. Yeah, so I'd just like to kind of come back to the use of AI in healthcare, which is something that's, been touted as a really, really big area. And in particular, the role of AI in supporting people in the community to manage their own health conditions and to manage their own behaviours, and the potential for algorithms and the use of AI to influence behaviour change, and how you see that in terms of both cybersecurity, but the regulation of the algorithms that might induce that behaviour change, compared to the situation which we have now. If you have drugs, which is a very well-established process for regulating and trialling drugs, how might we have a similar or an appropriate process for doing the same with algorithms and AI used in those kinds of applications?
Well, I'm going to say, we need a lot of research in this area, because there's no evidence, well, there's little evidence that says we get the right behavioural changes with the nudge tactics that you can, and how we build, we don't have the evidence around that, and how we, there's lots of, I'm involved in a project with people in Singapore and China about taking a picture of the food you're eating and it telling, the system telling you the nutritional value and all that. But what they've done is develop the technology to do this. And I'm going to make the point here that I forgot to make earlier, the point for diversity and interdisciplinary teams. Right, you cannot just leave this to the geeks alone, okay? Yeah, you have to bring in interdisciplinary teams, and we have to bring diverse teams into working on these issues. So you get people who understand the psychology, understand human behavior, the social scientists, the philosophers, the economists, the lawyers who are looking at how this is being applied. And we need research in this area. You can't just go ahead and do it. You have no idea what the consequences of that might be.
A nice example is using AI to, for job selection. And if it has the unconscious bias built into it from the programmer, then it's not doing any better. Right. So we had a gentleman there, with a jacket and tie, hand up, and then young lady at the front, and then we'll see what time we have left.
Thank you. We know that with a rapidly aging population, loneliness is one of the big problems that people face. What role do you think AI could have in trying to combat that? Could you be in a place where you have a robot that is in an elderly person's home and deals with that issue? And is there any evidence on, someone can look at a dog, a pet, and feel like they're getting some kind of emotional connection with a dog? Is there any reason that they couldn't get the same with a robot?
Let Alan take that one.
Yeah, it's a good question. So there are surrogate pets, and I well remember having a conversation about robots in care homes with care workers who look after elderly people with dementia. And what I learned, several things I learned. One is how little time those professionals have to actually engage in normal, conversation with those elderly people. The other thing is the trauma of them losing their pets when they move into the care home. So their attitude was, yeah, we need surrogate pets. Can we buy them now? And there's pretty good evidence. There's research been done that shows that the therapeutic value of surrogate pets is there. So that's definitely a plus in my view. But robots certainly can't solve loneliness. That's not, or AI. It's absolutely not a panacea for that. And I believe that robots and AIs can be incredibly helpful in elder care, but not as a replacement for humans. Instead, as a support to the human carers, to free up time for those conversations. The human stuff that really we need.
Thank you. Right, so I think, how are we doing for time? I think this may have to be the last question, I'm afraid. I know, time runs by quickly.
What do you think about how AI can help the development of the internet and things, and vice versa? For example, a microwave that turns on at 6 p.m. because it knows that's when you get home from work.
Oh, yes.
Internet of Things?
Well, Internet of Things. This is the of course, we're going to have AI in our houses, wherever we live in the future. The thing is, though, what people don't, they always think of that in terms of a person, right? We've had the question about loneliness. That might work if someone's living on their own. If you live in a family unit, or you live in a block of flats, or you're working in an office, what's the collective intent of all those people in terms of how the AI controls the environment that you're working in? You know, are we going to agree what temperature we want this room at? You know, I think these are completely unresearched issues, and it's not so much as like human-computer interaction used to be. It's all about what's your intention when you walk into a room. What are you actually trying to do? Well, are you going to be sitting down? Are you going to be running around and doing, you know, what? And that's really, there is some research being done on this, but it's very under-researched area. And so it's a good question, and it's far, you know, the stuff we've got at the moment is primitive compared to what we might be able to produce. And we've got, I hate to say this, but we've got brain-computer interfaces coming. And that's both very exciting and scary at the same time. But they're in the research labs.
Well, thank you both. I'm sorry, I know there are lots of other people who had their hands up for questions, and I just somehow sense we've only just scratched the surface of the subject.
Yeah.
But clearly no one can predict the future, but at least it's good that we have people thinking about it and anticipating what the future may hold for society. Thank you both, Wendy and Alan. And I think in closing, I'm going to invite Graham Reed, the chair of CaSE, to make a few closing remarks.
Jim, Wendy, and Alan, thank you such a lot. You've taken a subject that attracts quite a lot of hype, and you've just peeled back the curtain of that hype, and you've shown us some of the opportunities, the challenges. For me, the exciting bit was the uncertainties and the questions that I don't think we hear enough discussion about. And together with the audience, I think you've made for a really fabulous 90 minutes or so of discussion. Of course, these things don't happen on their own, and I just want to take a moment to thank some of the people that have made this evening possible. And I'll start with Leslie Thompson and Elsevier, who have kindly sponsored the event. Paul Hardacre and everyone at the Institute of Physics, who so kindly allowed us the use of their fabulous new building. It's a real privilege to be here so early in the life of the building. Of course, the team at CaSE, who worked tirelessly to represent the interests of the science and engineering community in a really very difficult political environment, and yet also find time to lay on an event like this. And I'll just, as you've heard from Sarah, and Sarah leads the team spectacularly well. Naomi, Nick, Anna, Rachel, James and Miriam together make it all happen, and that's all of them that there is. And of course, the CaSE members, one of the distinguishing features of CaSE is that its membership is drawn not entirely from one part of the community, but from such a broad range of organisations, each with their own interest in the well-being of science and engineering, and coming together as one to support the advocacy and the influencing that goes on from CaSE. They range from global businesses to universities, research charities, research institutes, trade unions, venture capitalists, further education colleges, and more, all pulling together because they all believe with one voice that we need a thoroughly healthy science and engineering community in this country to thrive and to tackle whatever challenges we face. That brings us to the end of this stage of the evening. The next stage of the evening is being poured into a glass just outside this room, and I trust that you'll join me for that part as well. But now, would you join me in thanking our three wonderful speakers for this evening's entertainment?